Okay, picture this. We're in the heart of ancient Jerusalem. It's a place buzzing with power, politics, and religion. And right in the middle of it all is a man named Nicodemus. He's got it all: power, respect, influence. But he's about to embark on a journey that will challenge everything he knows, a gripping story that takes him from the deepest shadows into the brightest light.
So that brings us to the central question of this whole story. Why would a man who is at the absolute top of his game risk his entire world? I mean, his reputation, his wealth, his position, everything. What could possibly be so important that it would drive him to a secret meeting in the dead of night?
To really get Nicodemus, we first have to understand the world he lived in. Jerusalem wasn't just some quiet city. It was a powder keg, simmering with tension under Roman occupation. This was a world of rigid rules, immense social pressure, and a peace that felt like it could shatter at any second.
First thing to know, Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and that's a big deal. These guys were the religious elite, the masters of Jewish law. They saw themselves as the guardians of their people's identity and traditions, holding the line against a world they saw as corrupting and dangerous.
But he wasn't just any Pharisee. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. Now think of the Sanhedrin as like the Supreme Court and the governing religious council all rolled into one. Being on it put Nicodemus at the absolute peak of Jewish society. He was a leader of leaders.
And this is the impossible tightrope that Nicodemus in the Sanhedrin had to walk every single day. On one side, you have their sacred duty to uphold Jewish law and tradition. But on the other, you've got the iron fist of Rome, whose only real concern was keeping order and crushing any hint of rebellion. So when a guy like Jesus starts drawing massive crowds, he's not just a religious figure, he's a political spark. And it was Nicodemus' job to make sure that spark didn't ignite an inferno.
So for Nicodemus to even show a little curiosity about Jesus, wow, that was a huge gamble. He could be labeled a heretic by his own peers, he could get on the wrong side of the Romans, he could lose the status and wealth he'd spent his entire life building. This was absolutely not a casual chat. This was a move that could cost him everything.
And yet, he takes that risk. And this brings us to that first critical moment in his story, a secret meeting shrouded in darkness that is going to change his life forever.
So in this secret conversation, Jesus hits him with this completely radical idea. To see the kingdom of God, you have to be born again. Now, for a Pharisee like Nicodemus, a man whose entire worldview was built on following the law to achieve righteousness, this idea of a spiritual rebirth was, well, it was completely alien. It was a total game changer.
And Nicodemus' response is so perfect, isn't it? He immediately takes it literally. How can I be born again? I'm an old man. It just brilliantly shows you where his head is at. He's still stuck in the physical, the logical, the legalistic world he knows so well.
You know, the timing of this meeting is no accident. The fact that Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night, that's not just a detail, it's a powerful symbol. It represents his need for secrecy for sure, but it also represents his own spiritual darkness and confusion. This is square one for him, a journey that starts in the shadows.
But that kind of searching, that kind of curiosity, it can't stay hidden in the dark forever. The next time we see Nicodemus, a little crack of light starts to appear, as his private questions begin to fuel some very public and very dangerous courage.
And this is a huge moment. Later on, when the rest of the Sanhedrin is basically ready to condemn Jesus without any kind of trial, Nicodemus speaks up. Now, he doesn't stand up and declare he's a follower. No, he's smarter than that. He uses their own law against them, simply asking for due process. It was subtle, but in that room, it was an incredibly brave act of defiance.
So when you lay it all out like this, you can really see the arc of his transformation. He starts as the secret seeker, coming at night with his questions. Then he evolves into the cautious defender, speaking up for justice in the council. And finally, as we're about to see, he becomes the public follower at the most dangerous moment imaginable. It's just a clear, powerful progression.
And that all leads us to the climax of his story. This is where Nicodemus' faith stops being about quiet questions or subtle arguments. This is where it becomes a bold, public, and unbelievably costly act of allegiance. So after the crucifixion, when Jesus' closest disciples are hiding in fear for their lives, Nicodemus steps out of the shadows, and he brings with him a staggering 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes for the burial. Let that sink in. This was a wildly expensive, lavish amount of spices. This wasn't just a burial, this was a burial fit for a king. This single act was his final, unmistakable public declaration. By handling a dead body, he made himself ceremonially unclean, a big deal for a Pharisee. He openly aligned himself with a man who had just been executed by the state as a criminal. He put his wealth, his position on the Sanhedrin, everything on the line. The man who came in the darkness was now standing in the full light of day for all to see.
This final act really cemented his legacy. So, what happened to the man who risked it all? Let's take a look at how history remembers Nicodemus.
Now, while the Bible itself doesn't tell us what happened next, early Christian tradition is pretty clear. Nicodemus paid a heavy price. It's believed that he was kicked out of the Sanhedrin, that he lost his fortune, and that he was eventually baptized, fully embracing the new faith he had once only dared to question in secret.
And for that incredible journey, for that transformation from a cautious, hidden seeker to a courageous public witness, he is remembered and honored as a saint in many Christian traditions. The man who began his story in the dark is now celebrated as a true figure of light.
You know, this verse just perfectly captures the essence of Nicodemus' life, doesn't it? He moved beyond just talking about things, beyond just asking questions. His faith became about action. Real, costly, courageous action. His story is just this incredible example of what it looks like to truly live out what you believe, no matter what it costs you.
And that's the question his story leaves echoing in our own lives. Nicodemus shows us that real conviction, true belief, is often proven by what we're willing to sacrifice for it. And it kind of forces us to turn that question on ourselves. What are we willing to risk for the things we truly believe in?